This video is going out to give you a little context, a little bit of info about the new film LUT updates that I've been talking about for the last few months. I had wanted to get these out by the end of 2021, but I just didn't want to rush them, and I'm glad I didn't. So, this is by no means an exhaustive video. This is just give you a quick overview, keep it short and sweet, just so you have a general sense of what went into these updates. The main thing I did was I rebuilt all of the Kodak LUTs. So that is Vision Teal, and Eastman. I rebuilt them for improved accuracy. So the target is the same as it's always been. I haven't changed the stocks that I'm emulating. I've just done a better job at emulating them than I initially did maybe 18 months ago when I released these. I've also decided to include the old Eastman, which I've called Eastman Remastered. So you basically get a 6th LUT now, which is also cool. So the new Eastman is going to look a lot closer to the actual Eastman stock from like the 70s and 80s than the previous one did. If you want to know more info about why that is, you can check out the Phantom LUT Instagram page, where I have a post dedicated to this. To give you a basic overview, if you can see here, this image, this is some footage from the original Blade Runner, and this is the remastered, newer version of Blade Runner. And I go through and look at a few other examples where I contrast the two versions. Basically, a lot of the old Eastman films were regraded and remastered with greater contrast and more of an orange-teal modern kind of grade. So when you're trying to emulate a stock, if you don't know that, then it can be a little confusing. But I didn't realize that actually when I first emulated the LUT, the stock. So I basically I've got two versions now, which is the modern version and then the actual original, more vintage dated version, which has more of like a purpley brown, rustic kind of color appearance. So that's cool. So I'm really excited that the Eastman will be that go-to LUT for more of a dated vintage feel. So yeah, the target hasn't changed. As I said, all of the stocks that I originally aimed to emulate are still the targets. And I just tweaked the Fuji LUTs. I didn't rebuild them because don't fix what ain't broke. So I tweaked Eterna the least, but I think I've just improved the skin tones, and then I slightly did a bit of work on bleach as well, just made it a little less harsh. So I'm going to focus on Vision for this video because it's probably the one with the biggest changes and the one that I want to focus on. So we're going to go through and watch some footage of Gladiator. I'm just going to talk about the stock and the look, and then I'll show you some more examples, and then we'll have some quick look at some LUT footage, and then we'll wrap it up. So here you can see golden skin tones, relatively accurate blues. You can see the sky there isn't super turquoise, and it's not too purple. It's nice and sort of realistic blue. Skin tones are pretty accurate, though, I would say. Obviously, there's a bias towards orange, reddy orange skin. And obviously, in this particular scene, there's a lot of sand and clay, and all of the actors have suntans. Plus, what the stock itself is doing, you get this very golden kind of orangey skin, which is really look at that. It looks great, but not every scene is going to draw that kind of a skin tone out, and that's one of the improvements over the old version of Vision. The skin's a bit more natural now, but I'm going to also talk about a few other little things. Just the contrast. If you look at the contrast, you can see that it's quite strong, the contrast. There's a fair bit of shadow detail. I'd say less shadow detail than, say, the Alexa has today, but still a lot of dynamic range. You can see all the way from these brighter parts of the image down to the darker parts. We're capturing and holding a lot of dynamic range here. The reds a blood red and rich and a dense kind of red. You can see on this this helmet of this female soldier here. And again, the golden skin. And then the highlights for the Vision stock, it gets quite, the roll-off's really beautiful. It looks very pastel-y. And we're going to look at some other examples here of Vision stock. This is some footage from the Thin Red Line, shot in 1998 on Vision. And yeah, you can see here the skin, again, that dark, it's got that dark orangey red quality. And then different circumstances, different lighting conditions, it looks more red, more pinky red here. So there's a bit of, there are dynamics at play. It's not always like it's always going to look golden, golden orange. But yeah, you can see the greens here are quite muted. Not in other footage I've looked at, it isn't necessarily this muted, so I'm not sure if this footage was affected in some way. But the greens are definitely not as saturated as, say, the modern Alexa. And in the colors in general, I mean, compared to the Alexa, it's a little less saturated, a little more muted and dated. And, these films are over 20 years old, and they kind of look like they're over 20 years old. But still, I would definitely say the colors are rich and vivid. And quite naturalistic. I mean, that's the thing. Vision was always intended to be that more realistic, true-to-life LUT of the film stocks, almost like the RE neutral and the RE packs. So Vision is meant to be sort of more of an all-purpose LUT. Much, and they used Kodak Vision and for a lot of Hollywood films because it did have a pretty naturalistic color rendition, and it wasn't too, it didn't draw too much attention to itself. It's pretty naturalistic, but obviously it has its quirks and its imperfections, and that's what we're going for. Now, when we talk about the, what I was talking about, the highlights of film, specifically Kodak being quite pastel-y, even though this is Kodak Vision 3, it sort of represents it very well. This image here, I love this. This is a great example. So here you see the interplay between these pastel-y, almost washed out highlights and these rich colors in the lower mids of the image. And the interplay between them is very filmic. You can see this, as we get brighter and brighter, the contrast lowers in the highlights, and it flattens out almost until it reaches white, and then it rolls off into the shadows, falls off into the shadows in a very creamy way. And that I've done a much better job with the new Kodak, the new Vision LUTs of replicating that. And again, even though these are Kodak Vision 3, I think it's still reminiscent. It's just these are great examples because this footage is quite overexposed, and so you get to really see the overexposure characteristics of the stock of Kodak. And I found in my more extensive research, I've obviously watched more films than just Gladiator and Thin Red Line, but in my, it's the same across the Vision stock in general. There is this sort of pastel-y quality when you overexpose the image, which I've done a much better job of replicating in the new LUTs, and it's really a big part of the filmic image is the way that the film handles highlights, and again the interplay with the highlights and the shadows. So this dense, rich, deep colors. At the same time, these washed out pastel-y colors, the way that if you play that right, it looks really, really distinctive of film. So let's have a quick look. I'll give you some examples. So you can see here, this is FX6, this is Vision, and you can see here a great example of that interplay on the skin tones here, because the skin tones here are capturing highlights, upper mids and lower mids. You see this beautiful tonality, this creamy tonality in the skin. Here, same here. You've got a lot of dynamic range here. This is the FX6 as well, and you can see these brighter parts of the image. See that? See just here. You can see this kind of rich color and this pastel-y. They're playing off each other, and it's really reminiscent of film, in my opinion. Here's another example, FX6. And again, you get those blood reds compared to the Alexa, which is slightly more magenta. Let's have a look at some more. This is Alexa footage. This is a great example. So again, lots of dynamic range here. Also, you're going to see like more of a tint in the highlights, slightly warmer tint as the image gets brighter and brighter. A little greener in the shadows. Relatively neutral in the mids. Yeah, you can see the interplay here on the skin. The contrast is quite strong in the mids, soft on the extreme ends of the highlights, and soft in the shadows. But yeah, the curve really is like over half the image. Like I spent weeks, even up till yesterday, tweaking the curve, the contrast characteristics of the LUT. So important to replicate that filmic look. And it really affects the colors too. I mean, you can just see the way the colors interplay here because of the contrast, the particular filmic contrast. It really has an impact on the colors. That's a nice one too. You can see the washed out pastel-y quality of the upper mids there. This is some pocket 4K footage. This is Vision as well. And again, lots of dynamic range to really show off that filmic contrast and tonality. Let's jump ahead a little. This is some footage shot by my good friend Dave Cleve that he was kind enough to donate for me to sort of work on the LUTs with and use as reference footage. And it's just beautiful stuff. They shot in Bali, and it's obviously a war film, and it really helps the LUTs. It really helps me visualize the LUTs the way, on footage befitting of the look I'm going for. Here's another great example. You get this. See what I was talking about. It's rich, but it's not overly saturated. That's another sort of trick. It's another challenge where the skin has that. It's got that red, rich quality. Obviously, the room itself has a fair bit of color in it, but it's never. It doesn't look modern. It looks about 20 years old, and that's kind of that's a fine line. It's hard to strike that balance. Now here's a good example. Make sure I got the right LUT. Yeah, this is actually S-Log2. This is some old footage of mine from my FS5, and this kind of does a great example. The right conditions and the right model. She's got a tan, sort of replicating that beautiful golden skin tone of like we saw in the Gladiator footage. And you see again a great example of the blood reds. But yeah, like this, if you've already got, obviously she's got a beautiful tan, and the LUT just takes that to the next level. And again, you get this beautiful interplay with these rich shadows, never overpowering though. And then this beautiful sort of pastel-y highlight, low con kind of effect. And that interplay creates this beautiful, rich tonality, especially in the hair, which has all that dynamic range. You've got the reflections and you've got the darker parts. And it's this beautiful golden, but still naturalistic look. Really was happy when I saw the LUT on this old footage. I had forgotten about this footage. Some Alexa footage, and again, just... Again, you see the oranges, while being rich, there's a kind of a muted quality to the richer colors in the LUT, much like film. Jump ahead. This is cool. This is some FS7 footage, S-Log3. Again, lots of dynamic range, and you really get to see that filmic interplay with the shadows, mids, and highlights again. So yeah, you guys get the hint. You get the idea. I'll just show you this one. This is cool. The blues really pop. This is again Vision, and you see all the skin tones. Yeah, it's really popping. So, is there anything else I wanted to show you? This is A7S3. There's a nice finishing shot. So you see this. Yeah. So look, it's the density of the color, it's the richness of the color, the darkness of the colors, again interplaying with that pastel-y quality in the upper, the highlights and the upper mids, and that interplay with the right amount of contrast. It's not too crunchy. It's obviously These LUTs are more crunchy than the Alexa neutral LUT because film is quite when I say crunchy, I mean contrasty. Film is quite contrasty, but it's a real fine balance where you replicate that filmic contrast while not losing the dynamic range, and that's all about having non-linear contrast. Where you have more of a different kind of curve than the Alexa has, and it's about more contrast in the mids and then a lower contrast in the shadows and highlights exponentially. And anyway, yeah, that plus a bunch of other factors that I don't have time to go into, but yeah, lots of work went into these guys. I'm really excited about them. I can't wait for you to use them. I can't wait to see what you do with them. Please tag me or tag Phantom LUTs, don't tag Joel, tag Phantom LUTs on Instagram. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do with these. And I look forward to using these on my own projects coming up. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy the LUTs. Catch you later.